Hello and welcome to Pictorial Planet. My name's John Finch. Today we're going to be looking at Ilford HP5. It's a film that I don't use much at all in 35mm, but do tend to put the odd roll through my SL66, my medium format camera. I don't use it in 35mm because of the grain and the contrast. It's a high contrast film and it can be just too grainy for me for my pictorial work. But in medium format, that grain becomes less of a problem. And when I do put it through my medium format camera, I tend to develop it in D23. Those of you who have bought my book will probably see that. I like HP5 and D23 for various reasons. It has a lovely tonality, especially in medium format. It tends to give the prints a little bit of a glow, a sort of rodinal look, but without the grain. So that's nice. It's very controllable and very easy to print. And it brings down the contrast of HP5. Now, I'm not a pusher. I don't push films. I think if you want a fast film, buy a fast film. Don't try and push other films to higher speeds. But that's a personal thing. I'm a pictorial photographer, so I'm always looking for that pictorial tonality that I want in my images. So as we've been using FX55 lately, I thought we'd have a look at how it works with HP5. What is the grain like? What is the sharpness and what film speed does it give us? If it increases the film speed, that's a positive thing for many of us who are using medium or the large format users. But how does it compare to that D23 Replenished? Because I really like that combination. So we're going to look at both today. We're going to look at the same photograph developed in both developers and see how they compare. Will FX55 draw me away from my D23 Replenished with HP5? Let's go over to the darkroom and take a look. Here is our D23 Replenished. Now, this is relatively fresh, this one. Have a look at that. Look at that. It's starting to get all gunge inside of it. This is about 8 films old. So it's relatively fresh. I will use this up to 30 films and then I'll discard 3/4 of it. I'll make up a fresh batch of D23 and I'll put it in, adding it to that quarter. So I only make up 750mm and add it to the 250mm that's left of the old seasoned D23 Replenished, and that pre-seasons it and off it goes again. So this is about 8 films, I think, old. Here's the Replenisher. I make 500 milliliters of the Replenisher at a time. I usually use 50 grams of sulfite, 5 grams of metol, and it's 10 grams of metaborate, sodium metaborate. If you don't have the sodium metaborate, you can make a separate mixture in 150 ml of hot water, dissolve 7 grams of borax, let it cool down, important, let it cool down, and then add 1.5 grams of sodium hydroxide to that mixture. Mix them together. Now you've created 10 grams of sodium metaborate, and then add it as you're making the new Replenisher. And that's how I do that. So this is great, isn't it? The good thing, one of the advantages I find in having the Replenisher like this is it's always available. Look, I don't need to mix anything up. It's sat on the shelf. I can just pour 500ml of this into a graduate, warm it up to 20 centigrade, and boom, I'm ready to develop very quick. It's a lovely developer. It's one of those I keep coming back to. You know, there's others like Rodinal that always have a place on my shelf. D23 and Rodinal live on my shelf because they're just two very lovely developers that have a lot of character, work very well with loads of films, and are just great to have around. So I might use FX55 most of the time, but these sit there waiting for that special day when I've put one of these through my SL66 and I can come and use my D23 Replenished. So that's why I have this developer around. If you want to know more about it, buy my book. I talk about it extensively in the book and give lots of tips of how to use it. Now, so I've got my FX55 ready. Now all I need to do is go outside and get the photograph. And the problem is it's been raining solid for a week. Well, it's still pouring down outside. It's been raining like this for at least a week, maybe more. And so I'm being very careful with my Crawley SL66. I've got the flowers set up that I want to shoot. And I've taken a meter reading. And the meter reading was done like so. It's an incident meter reading, and it's a 60th f8. Now that's running HP5 through the camera at 320 EI. That's for the D23. We lose about 1/3 to 2/3 of a stop with D23 Replenished. With the FX55, I'll take another load of shots, and I will be using 500, an EI of 500 for that, because that's the speed it gives with Ilford HP5. I've done a lot of testing over the last week or so about that. So I'm keeping the top down. Let's take the photograph and get in before we get any rain in this equipment and possibly damage something. So I make sure I've got a really good focus, very sharp, 60th of a second at f8 is good, and I'm going to use f8 because at this close range we're going to need depth of field. We're going to need to get this flower in. Medium format, we're going to need a little bit more than I would with a 35mm camera. So I'm going to go for f8, and that's looking really nice. So let's take the shot. Boom. I'll take a load more, and then I'll get them developed, and we'll take a look at the negatives. I first developed the D23 at 20 degrees centigrade, and I gave it 8.5 minutes. And with D23 you need to use the Kodak agitation system. Agitate for the first 30 seconds and then give it 5 seconds agitation every 30 seconds from then on. For me, 5 seconds agitation is just 2 gentle inversions. For the FX55, I developed it at 20 degrees centigrade again for 10.5 minutes, 10.5 minutes. And with FX55, I use the Ilford agitation, which is the first 30 seconds. Then I agitate on the minute for 10 seconds, 3 inversions. And then every minute, 3 inversions. And yeah, 10.5 minutes. So let's go see what they look like. Here are the negatives. At the top is the D23, and at the bottom is the FX55. Remember, we did 8.5 minutes in the D23 Replenished and 10.5 minutes in FX55. And they look pretty similar. You can see there's maybe a little bit more development gone on here, but as we'll find when we print these will actually print at the same grade. It's taken me a lot of testing to get FX55 and HP5 working well together, and I think I've got a really good system now at 10.5 minutes, and they both print at grade 2, and we're going to take a look at those shortly. But there's very little difference as we look at them. I'll just bend down and examine these. There looks like a little more contrast here in the flower of the D23 compared to the FX55, but they're very similar. It's hard to tell in the negatives what they're going to look like when they're printed. Lovely negatives, both of them, really nice to look at, and under the loupe they're both lovely and sharp. It's a nice film combination with both of these developers. Let's cut over to the computer and see if we can gain any more information from some scans. I've scanned in the 2 negatives here, I used my Nikon Super Cool Scan 9000, and I scanned them both in at 4000 dpi, so they're both the same. And so let's take a look at them. As you can see, that I've left the labels on. D23 8.5 minutes on the left, FX55 10.5 minutes on the right. And at this resolution now, the way we're looking at them in this recording, they look pretty similar. So let's zoom in and have a look here at the flower. And I think straight away I can see that the FX55 is more detailed, it's sharper, and that's due to the fact that there's more grain. Let's just look at that grain. On the left hand side, look at this dark area that I'm circling around here for the D23 grain. Very fine grain. On the right hand side, the FX55 grain is more prominent. It's quite a lot more prominent. It's not bad. This is a massive blow up of this negative. That grain is not bad at all, but it's certainly more prominent with the FX55, and we would expect that, wouldn't we? The D23 Replenished is very fine grain developer, not only because it's a solvent developer with a high amount of sodium sulfite, but also because it's replenished, so the bromide byproducts of development stay in the developer. We reuse it over and over and over again, and so the grain actually gets less and less as we replenish. So it's a wonderful developer if you want to reduce grain. But having said that, this is sharper and slightly grainier, they both look really good. Let's take a look at the tonality. Now, on the left hand side, look at this petal here. That's lovely, subtle tonality in that petal. This is what I like about D23 and HP5. The two are a match made in heaven. Lovely tonality. On the right hand side, the FX55 has done a good job. In some ways one might say there's more tonality, but it doesn't somehow have this lovely three-dimensional look that this has got. And this is the glow that I might have mentioned earlier. You see up here, there's a kind of glow to the top of that petal, which is missing from the FX55. This is very attractive to me, this glow, in the final prints. And that's why I say it's a match made in heaven. Some developers go really well with some films, and this is a great example of one, which is why I've always stuck to this combination. HP5 is also very good with 510 Pyro. That makes a nice job of HP5 too, and very fine grain, but it doesn't have this D23 glow, which is very nice, and reminiscent of Rodinal without the grain, which is lovely. Yes, talk about grain. Look at this out of focus area here, and then look at this here, and there's a lot more grain going on in the FX55. Because of that higher grain, it's sharper. That's one of the reasons why we can see these stamens more sharply. The larger grain makes more definite lines in the negative, and so we see a more sharper picture. There, look at that line going around there. It's more definite, more defined than the same line here, and so that is how it enhances sharpness. So lovely, it's really nice. I'm looking at this stamen here. It's well defined in the FX55, and it's a bit different here on the left. It's not as well defined, but it's luminous. There's a luminosity to it, more than on the FX55. Very interesting. I hope you found that interesting to look at them scanned in like this and get a really good example. Look how sharp this is. Look at the sharpness. FX55, typical of an acutance developer. There's a line around this, and on the right hand side it's not the same. It's not as sharp, but it's still well defined. Defined enough for what we need in pictorial photography for sure. So very nice, both of them lovely negatives. I wouldn't turn either of these away. They're both great negative. The FX55 is a lovely negative too. So I think the best thing I can do is print them and we'll have a look at that. I have to say, these two prints look so similar. They really are similar. The one on the top now is the FX55 and it's lovely. I mean, there's no doubt that developer is superb. It's done a great job with this film and it's so nuanced. Look at those lovely details and that lovely sharpness in there. That look at that petal, the way it stands out against the dark background. You can see the acutance line. Can you see that on the video? There's a black line around it, the acutance line. It's wonderful. It's a beautiful developer and very sharp, and yet no grain to speak of in this 10 by 8 or 8 by 8, I suppose, because it's square print. Now let's have a look at the D23, because there's nothing wrong with that at all, and I think you may be able to see that glow that I was talking about. There's a certain way the contrast is with this film and developer combination. These lovely light areas it has around this petal. If you look at that, you can see a light, very light line around there, and if I bring the other one in, that line isn't there. This is a very accurate print. I mean, that's exactly how the flower looked. And the D23 has brought something to the table, something a bit more artistic perhaps, more pictorial. There's that line. These were taken at the same time. All of these negatives, I just shot the whole roll off in about a minute and then cut it in half and processed the two halves. This area here is glowing with a lovely highlight, and here we don't quite have that. Instead, what FX55 is doing is giving us detail and nuances within the detail. Very nice. If I only had one developer, it would be so hard to choose. I want to say I'd have FX55, but I'm not sure because D23 is such a good developer too. Of course, it can cause skin problems, whereas FX55 is much safer. But this is lovely. I'll just come in a little bit closer, and I hope you can see that in focus. It's beautiful. It's quite beautiful. Also, look at this. This here is very interesting. Look how it's picked up. It's highlighted this leaf more. And yet here, it's a bit darker, isn't it? It hasn't picked up that highlight. So there's the glow. There's the difference in the contrast curve of the two developers. Can you see the difference there? I think I prefer the D23, to be honest. I think I still prefer this combination, D23 and HP5. Okay, well, I'll leave that with you to decide for yourself what you think is the best of these two, and I thank you very much for watching. Thanks everybody. Thank you to my patrons. Thank you to everyone who buys my book. I truly appreciate you all, and next week we've got something a little bit different and fun. So see you then. Bye for now.